If you look at the device you are holding right now, whether it's a phone or, I don't know, laptop on your desk, there's this really fundamental illusion built into how we use it.
Oh, absolutely. The whole system is designed to hide the machinery.
Yeah, exactly. Like when you save a photo to the cloud or you ask some AI to write code for you, the result feels, instantaneous. It feels completely weightless.
Right. It just sort of vanishes into the ether.
Yeah. We've basically designed the digital experience to feel like invisible magic, fictionless magic.
Well, I mean, it is a very intentional linguistic trick, even just the terminology, calling it the cloud.
Yeah, the cloud.
Right. It suggests this fluffy, ethereal thing floating above us, completely detached from the dirt and the actual physical constraints of the real world.
And I buy into that illusion every single day. I really do. But I was going through the stack of research we pulled for today's deep dive, and my entire perception just totally shifted.
I'm not surprised. The reality is pretty jarring.
It really is. Because thinking the cloud is weightless is like thinking your electricity just magically pops out of the plastic wall outlet in your living room.
Right. Ignoring the miles of wire and the power plants.
Exactly. And today, we are going completely behind the curtain. We're going to trace those wires, dig up the pipes, and look at the actual dirt. Because your data doesn't float in the sky.
No, it definitely doesn't.
It lives in these massive, ridiculously resource-hungry physical structures right here on the ground.
Mm.
So our mission today is to unpack the, frankly, fascinating environmental and infrastructural reality of what it actually takes to keep the internet running.
And we have a really interesting specific case study for this.
We do. The focal point of our research today is somewhere you probably wouldn't immediately associate with global tech behemoths. We are looking at Nassau County, Florida.
Which is rapidly becoming basically the perfect microcosm for this massive global engineering tension.
Yeah, because right now in Nassau County, there is an active moratorium on data centers.
Right. The local government advanced this first reading moratorium back in April of 2026. They effectively just slammed on the brakes.
And not because they have some ideological vendetta against tech.
No, not at all. It's because of very pressing, deeply physical realities. They are worried about their groundwater, their power grid, and just basic local land use.
Right. So if you're listening and wondering how a zoning meeting in a Florida county affects the global internet, well, buckle up.
It's all connected.
It really is. We're going to start by looking at the staggering thirst of these facilities and the absolute regulatory gauntlet you have to run just to tap a well.
That alone is a huge hurdle.
Oh, yeah. And from there, I want to try and wrap my head around the living geological mechanics of the Floridan aquifer because the underground physics there are wild.
The hydrogeology is fascinating.
Then we're going to talk about power. Specifically, the sheer volume of natural gas required to keep a server farm from going dark.
Okay, the energy appetite.
And finally, we'll look at how a local government actually tries to translate all these massive engineering puzzles into binding law, a draft zoning ordinance that could honestly be a blueprint for the rest of the country.
It's an incredibly delicate balancing act. And really, the only way to understand the zoning laws they're drafting is to first strip away the myths.
Right, the myths about what a tech company can actually do when they just roll into town.
Exactly.
Well, let's start right there. Let's look at the most pressing physical need of a data center, which is water.
Always water.
Yeah. When you have millions of servers processing algorithms, they get hot. Enormous metal melting amounts of heat. And you need water to cool them down.
Massive amounts of it.
Right. Now, when I first read about the cooling requirements for these hyperscale facilities, I'll admit, my immediate thought was pretty simplistic.
How so?
I just figured, okay, a tech company has an unlimited budget. They buy 500 acres of land in Nassau County. They bring in a massive drilling rig, and they just punch a 2,000-foot hole straight down to get to the water.
Oh, right. Yeah, that is what hydrogeologists usually refer to as the 2,000-foot well misconception.
Is that a common thing?
It's probably the single most common assumption people make about groundwater. We tend to view property rights vertically,
Oh, like straight down to the center of the earth.
Exactly. People assume that if you hold the deed to the surface dirt, you have the absolute right to whatever is beneath it, and that enough capital can just bypass any geological or regulatory obstacle.
But looking at the geological surveys we have, Florida's geology kind of makes it tempting to think that way, right?
True.
Because the Floridan aquifer system does actually have fresh water extending down to 2,000 feet below the surface in this specific region. So technically, the water is sitting right there.
Oh, the water is absolutely there. The technical feasibility of drilling a well that deep is not the issue.
Right.
But this is the critical distinction tech companies run into. Technical feasibility has absolutely nothing to do with regulatory approval. You cannot simply fire up a drill rig in Florida.
Yeah.
Especially not for a colossal industrial withdrawal like a hyperscale data farm.
So I want to understand the mechanics of why that is, because there was a phrase in the research that kept popping up, and it honestly sounds vaguely terrifying.
What phrase?
Delineated contamination areas. It sounds like something out of a biohazard movie.
Yeah.
What exactly is a delineated contamination area, and what does it mean for someone trying to drill a well in Nassau or Duval County?
Well, it's not quite a sci-fi biohazard zone, but it is a very serious hydrogeological marker.
Okay.
Basically, a delineated contamination area is a legally designated zone where the groundwater is known to be highly vulnerable to surface pollution, or it has a documented history of contamination.
Like from what? Chemical spills?
Yeah, perhaps legacy agricultural runoff, old industrial solvents, or even leaking underground storage tanks from decades ago.
Wow.
And because the Nassau and Duval area sits in a region intersecting some of these zones, the state enforces highly rigorous construction standards for any new well.
So you can't just like drop a PVC pipe down a hole and call it a day.
Not even close. Think about it. When you drill a well, you are essentially creating a superhighway from the surface straight down into the pristine drinking water supply.
Oh, right. You're poking a hole in the protection.
Exactly. So if you don't seal that highway perfectly, any contaminant on the surface soil, pesticides, fertilizer will just wash right down the outside of your pipe and poison the entire aquifer.
That would be a disaster.
So inside a delineated area, the district dictates incredibly specific casing requirements.
And casing is the actual metal tube of the well, right?
Yes, the protective outer tube. But more importantly, they mandate the precise engineering of the grouting.
Grouting. Like what you put between bathroom tiles.
No, not like bathroom tiles. In well construction, it's a specialized high-density cement mixture, and it has to be pumped under immense pressure into the microscopic gap between the drilled earth and the metal casing.
Wow. Just to fill that tiny space.
Yes. It has to form a flawless, impermeable seal from the surface all the way down to the aquifer layer. And the state dictates the exact chemical makeup of that grout, the depth it must reach, and the materials of the casing itself.
That is intense.
And every single step must be executed, documented, and legally signed off by licensed water well contractors.
Honestly, it sounds less like digging a well and more like building a subterranean skyscraper foundation.
It really is an engineering feat.
But okay, let's play devil's advocate for the tech giant for a second. They have billions of dollars. They are more than happy to pay for the titanium casing, the high-pressure grout, the best engineers in the world.
Sure.
If they own the land and they're willing to meet all those safety standards, why isn't it an open-ended right to pump? If I buy the land, why don't I own the water under it?
Because that assumption fundamentally misunderstands Florida water law.
Okay, how so?
What we are looking at here is the framework of water use permits, and these are managed in this region by the St. Johns River Water Management District.
Right, the SJRWMD.
Yes. The district does not operate on the principle of capture.
Meaning whoever pumps it owns it.
Exactly. They do not do that. They view the aquifer as a shared, finite public resource. The water beneath your property is physically connected to the water beneath your neighbor's property, the local strawberry fields, and the municipal drinking supply.
So the concept of private ownership just completely stops at the water table.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
You are granted the use of the water, not outright ownership of the body of water itself.
I see.
And when a facility of this magnitude applies for what's called a public supply or industrial use, well, the district doesn't just check their engineering schematics. They do a massive computational model of the aquifer.
What are they looking for in that model? Like, let's say a hyperscale data center comes in and says, hey, our cooling towers are massive. We need 10 million gallons a day.
Well, the district takes that 10 million gallon request, feeds it into their hydrogeological models, and asks one very specific question.
Which?
If we pull 10 million gallons from this specific coordinate at this specific depth every single day, whose well goes dry?
Wow. Literally mapping the impact.
Right. They evaluate the drawdown cone, That's the localized drop in the water table around the pump. If that drawdown cone reaches a local farmer or a nearby town's drinking well, the permit is denied or drastically reduced.
They won't just let you dry out the town.
Never. Furthermore, they legally mandate efficiency. The district will force the tech company to prove that they cannot use reclaimed wastewater or other alternative sources before they are ever allowed to touch the pristine aquifer water.
And reading the moratorium notes from the Nassau County staff, there's one specific fear that seems to trump all the others. It's not just about local wells going dry. It's about a phenomenon called saltwater intrusion.
Oh, yeah. That is the existential threat for coastal Florida.
And that's why Nassau County hit the pause button, right?
Exactly. The county staff are using this moratorium period to rigorously model the long-term sustainability and the sheer physical limits of the system. They are asking the ultimate question. If we allow industrial-scale pumping, are we going to accidentally pull the Atlantic Ocean into our drinking water?
Okay, to understand how a data center could accidentally pull the ocean underground, we need to talk about the living mechanics of the Floridan aquifer system itself. And this was the part of the research that just completely upended my mental model of what groundwater actually is.
How were you picturing it before?
Honestly, like an underground Mississippi River.
Oh, like a cave.
Yeah, exactly. I always picture aquifers as these massive, hollow, subterranean lakes. You know, you watch a movie where explorers fall through the crust of the earth and splash into a giant, dark, underground sea. I just figured a well was dropping a really long straw into that lake.
It is a great visual, for sure, but hydrogeologically, it is completely inaccurate.
Yeah, I learned that the hard way.
Right. Groundwater doesn't sit in giant, hollow lakes. It's stored in, and moves through, the microscopic pores and fractures of solid rock. Think of the Floridan aquifer less like an underground lake and much more like a gigantic region-wide geological sponge.
A sponge made of rock.
Yes, porous limestone and carbonate rock.
Okay. But the research points out that Nassau County has a very specific feature within this sponge. It's called the Fernandina Permeable Zone.
Right, highly significant area.
Now, the documents describe this zone as cavernous. So if I'm trying to abandon my underground lake theory, the word cavernous is confusing me. Am I supposed to picture literal caves down there, like where a scuba diver could swim around?
I totally understand the confusion. In the context of hydrogeology, cavernous porosity doesn't usually mean literal walk-through caves with stalactites. I mean, those do exist in some parts of Florida's karst topography, but
not what we're talking about here.
Right. Deep underground in the Fernandina zone, cavernous means the limestone is heavily dissolved, highly fractured, and incredibly porous.
Okay, so just really big holes in the sponge.
Exactly. It has void spaces that are much larger than typical microscopic rock pores. And because of these larger interconnected voids, this specific layer can transmit massive, massive volumes of fluid.
And the sources say the water in this Fernandina zone is actively moving. It's flowing upward and toward the coast. So can we trace that journey? Like if I'm a drop of water in this system, where does my journey begin and how do I end up flowing upward?
Sure. Your journey begins inland in the central and northern parts of the state. Rain falls, percolates down through the soil, and enters the recharge zones of the Floridan aquifer.
Okay, I'm underground now.
Yes, and once you are in the system, you are part of a massive, pressurized body of water. Because the recharge areas are often at a slightly higher elevation, gravity creates immense hydraulic pressure pushing down and outward.
So the water inland is physically pushing the water closer to the coast.
Precisely. It's called hydraulic head. The water migrates slowly eastward through the porous limestone.
Heading for the ocean.
Right. And when it reaches the Nassau County area, it encounters the complex geology of the Fernandina Permeable Zone. The pressure dynamics force that huge volume of fresh to brackish water to flow upward toward the surface layers and continually eastward toward the ocean.
It actually empties into the Atlantic.
It does, and this is where the sheer, mind-boggling scale of this natural system becomes apparent. The U.S. Geological Survey estimates that before large-scale human development, before we paved over recharge zones and started industrial pumping, the pressure in this aquifer was immense.
How immense are we talking?
So immense that over 10% of its total discharge actually leaked upward in coastal areas. It didn't just seep into the swamps, it blasted out of the ocean floor, creating offshore submarine springs.
Offshore submarine springs. I literally had to read that section of the source material 3 times. You were telling me there are freshwater springs bubbling up from the bottom of the saltwater ocean.
Yes. They exist on both the Gulf and Atlantic coasts of northern peninsular Florida. And there is one beautifully documented example just south of our focus area near St. Augustine.
Right, the Crescent Beach submarine spring.
Exactly.
This is my absolute favorite detail from the entire stack of research. I want you, if you're listening right now, to just try and visualize this.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like something out of a fantasy novel. You take a boat 2.5 miles out into the Atlantic Ocean, you dive down roughly 60 feet below the waves, and sitting there on the ocean floor is a geological vent blasting pure, fresh groundwater directly into the sea.
That is the reality of the Crescent Beach Spring. And it is not just a little trickle either.
No.
No, it is classified as at least a second magnitude spring.
Right.
In hydrogeology, that means it is discharging between 10 and 100 cubic feet of water every single second.
Wow.
It's a massive localized upwelling of fresh water right in the middle of a marine environment.
But how does the physics of that even work? I mean, if you are 60 feet deep in the Atlantic Ocean, the sheer weight of millions of gallons of salt water pushing down on that hole in the seafloor must be staggering. How does the fresh water push back?
That is the perfect question, and it illustrates the concept of hydraulic head perfectly.
The pressure from inland.
Exactly. The pressure of the fresh water moving from the inland recharge zones, pushing through the dense limestone, and funneling up through the Fernandina zone is so intense that it literally overpowers the hydrostatic weight of the Atlantic Ocean. The aquifer is essentially a pressurized hose, and the spring is the nozzle.
That is unbelievable. And there was a historical anecdote in the sources that just blew my mind. Because of the sheer volume of fresh water pushing to the surface of the ocean of these springs, it's historically plausible that in the 18th and 19th centuries, sailors could refill their barrels out there.
Yes, the waiting ships and merchant vessels.
Right. They were operating off the northeast Florida coast, and they could resupply their drinking water without ever coming to shore. They could sail 2 miles out, find the upwelling where the ocean water was boiling with fresh water, drop their wooden barrels over the side, and haul up clean drinking water right from the sea.
It is a stunning illustration of what a healthy, fully pressurized aquifer looks like.
It really is.
But if we bring this back to the reality of 2026 and the Nassau County Data Center Moratorium, this beautifully balanced pressure system is the exact mechanism behind the county's deepest fear.
Because it's a tug of war. I was trying to think of an analogy for this. It's like nature built this massive, highly pressurized, leaky underground aqueduct that just happens to vent out into the middle of the ocean.
Right.
The inland water pushes out, holding the ocean back. But if a 1 gigawatt hyperscale data farm comes into Nassau County and drops a massive industrial well, and they start sucking 10 or 15 million gallons of water out of the ground every single day, they are going to lower the pressure inside the aqueduct.
Your analogies is exactly right. If you aggressively pump the aquifer in Nassau County, you lower the hydraulic head. You literally suck the pressure right out of the system.
And the ocean is just waiting.
Yes. When the freshwater pressure drops, the Atlantic Ocean doesn't just sit there. The immense weight of the sea pushes back.
The tug of war reverses.
Yes. The salt water reverses course. It pushes backward through those submarine springs, it permeates the coastal limestone, and it begins to creep inland, creeping underground straight toward the municipal drinking wells. That is saltwater intrusion.
And once that happens, you can't just undo it, can you? Like, you can't just pump the salt back out.
It is virtually irreversible on a human timescale. Once heavy saltwater settles into the porous matrix of the limestone, it is incredibly difficult to flush out. You essentially lose that portion of the aquifer forever.
Oh, wow.
This is why the St. Johns River Water Management District is so strict. A data center isn't just lowering a water table. If they aren't regulated, they're actively threatening the structural integrity of an ancient geological barrier.
Okay, so if you are a tech company and you realize you cannot get the water you need to cool your facility, either because the district denies the permit or because the county bans the massive wells to prevent the ocean from intruding, what is your backup plan? You still have to cool the servers.
If you cannot use evaporative water cooling, you have to pivot to highly energy-intensive mechanical chillers, essentially massive industrial air conditioners.
That's expensive.
It is. But to run those chillers, plus the millions of servers themselves, you need an unfathomable amount of power.
Which brings us to the second massive physical footprint of the cloud, energy. And specifically, the natural gas infrastructure required to run these facilities when the local electrical grid simply cannot handle the load.
The grid usually can't.
Right. So let's talk about the sheer appetite of these data farms. Because again, the numbers in the research don't feel real until you put them into context.
The scale is jarring. To understand the gas demand, we first have to understand the electrical demand. Data centers are rated in megawatts. Historically, a 10 or 20 megawatt facility was considered large. Today, tech companies are proposing 100 megawatt, 500 megawatt, and even 1 gigawatt on-site power plants.
So let's look at the baseline. Let's say a data center wants to build a 100 megawatt on-site natural gas plant just to power its own servers. How much physical natural gas does that require every single day?
A highly efficient 100 megawatt gas-fired power plant requires roughly 10 to 15 million standard cubic feet of natural gas per day. In the industry, they abbreviate that as MMSCFT.
Okay, I need to pause here because 15 million standard cubic feet is a meaningless number to my brain. How do I visualize 15 million cubic feet of gas? Are we talking about filling a football stadium?
It's actually much more than that. If you imagine the massive Goodyear blimp, the iconic airship, it holds about 200,000 cubic feet of helium.
Okay, one blimp.
So to run just a 100 megawatt data center for 24 hours, you would need the equivalent volume of about 75 Goodyear blimps filled with natural gas every single day.
75 blimps of gas a day, just for 100 megawatts.
Yeah.
But as you said, the new hyperscale facilities being designed for artificial intelligence training and massive cloud storage aren't 100 megawatts anymore. They're aiming for 1 gigawatt, which is 1,000 megawatts.
Which means that the natural gas requirement scales proportionally. A 1 gigawatt data center would demand between 100 to 150 million standard cubic feet of natural gas per day.
That's 750 blimps of gas a day.
Exactly.
What does a load like that do to a county's infrastructure? I mean, if you are the mayor or the county planner in Nassau, how do you even process an industrial request of that magnitude?
You have to fundamentally realize that you are no longer dealing with standard municipal growth. A 150 MMSCFD demand rivals the energy consumption of small to mid-sized cities.
Wow.
You aren't hooking up a new residential subdivision or expanding a shopping mall. You are introducing an industrial behemoth that requires dedicated transmission-level infrastructure to feed it continuously. It represents a massive sustained shock to the local gas network.
So if a tech behemoth comes knocking on Nassau County's door tomorrow and says, hey, we need 150 million cubic feet of gas a day starting next year, where does the gas actually come from? Let's map out the physical pipelines. Because looking at the infrastructural maps in our sources, Nassau County isn't exactly the gas capital of the world.
It isn't. Nassau County sits at the very northeastern edge of Florida's natural gas network. It functions more like a structural backbone for local distribution and specific industrial customers, rather than being a massive central hub with giant interstate trunk lines running straight through it.
Right, but there are 3 major localized pipelines that form this backbone.
Yes, let's look at what the sources call the big 3 lines.
I was tracing these on the map. Line number 1 is the Callahan Intrastate Pipeline.
Yes, the Callahan line is a 26.5-mile pipeline. It's relatively new. It was completed in 2020. It runs from a gate station near Crawford Road in Callahan, tracking eastward over to Radio Avenue and Highway 17 in Yulee.
Why was it built so recently?
It was constructed specifically to bring additional natural gas capacity and reliability into Nassau and Duval counties to support general regional growth. It was basically an anticipatory infrastructure project.
Okay, so that's a fresh pipe. Line number 2 on the map is the Duval-Nassau County line to Amelia Island Pipeline.
Correct. This is roughly a 26-mile pipeline. The interesting facet of this line is its ownership structure. It operates under a shared model, owned roughly 50-50 by a Peninsula Pipeline Company and Peoples Gas.
And the 3rd major artery.
That is the Jacksonville System to Fernandina Beach Pipeline. This project was announced back in 2012. It's a 33-mile line that connects the Peoples Gas Jacksonville system up to the Rock 10 paper mill in Fernandina Beach, providing critical local distribution service for the county and the island. It is operated jointly by Florida Public Utilities and Peoples Gas.
So, hearing all this, my immediate non-engineer assumption is, great, we have 3 massive steel pipes running right through the county. The data center just buys a plot of land near the Callahan line, welds a tap onto the pipe, and starts pulling their 150 million cubic feet a day. Easy.
Yeah, that assumption leads directly into the incredibly complex world of pipeline reserve capacity.
Oh.
The reality of natural gas infrastructure is that just because a pipeline runs right past your front door, it does not mean it has the room to carry your gas.
I always struggle with that concept. If the pipe is physically there and it's full of gas, Isn't the gas just flowing? Why can't I just take some sun?
Think of the pipeline like a major interstate highway.
Mm,
Just because the highway has 3 lanes and you physically live next to an on-ramp doesn't mean you can just drive 500 semi-trucks onto it at rush hour.
that makes sense.
You have to consider how many cars are already on the highway and, more importantly, how many other companies have paid for a guaranteed exclusive right to use those lanes at any given moment.
Okay. So it comes down to contracts and physics. If a county planner is trying to figure out if these 3 lines can support a data center, what specific data do they need from the pipeline operators?
They need highly proprietary, granular operating details. You would have to sit down with the engineers at Peninsula Pipeline, Peoples Gas, and Seacoast, the operator of the Callahan line, and really audit their systems. First, you need the pipeline's original engineering design capacity. What is the absolute maximum volume of gas this steel tube can safely transport in a 24-hour period?
And once you know the maximum limit.
Then you have to look at the firm contract commitments. In the gas industry, there is a vital, non-negotiable distinction between firm capacity and interruptible capacity.
Let's define those, because that seems to be the crux of the issue.
Firm capacity means a customer, let's say a local hospital or a municipal power plant, has signed an ironclad contract. They pay a premium to guarantee that no matter what happens, their gas will flow. Even on the coldest day of the year when demand spikes, the pipeline operator legally must deliver that volume.
And interruptible capacity.
Interruptible capacity is a cheaper contract. It means you can use the pipeline on normal days. But if a winter freeze hits Florida and the people with firm contracts need all the gas to heat their homes, the guy in the pipeline control room will physically send a signal to close the valve to your facility. You are interrupted. You are cut off, so the priority customers survive.
And a hyperscale data center running AI models cannot ever be cut off.
Never. A data center requires guaranteed 24/7, 365 firm capacity. A 5-minute interruption could crash millions of user sessions, corrupt massive data lakes, and cost tens of millions of dollars. So the county has to ask the pipeline operator, after all your existing firm contracts are accounted for, do you have 150 million cubic feet of unused, uncontracted firm capacity left over for this data farm?
And beyond the legal contracts, there's the raw physical engineering. Because if you tap a high-pressure line and start sucking out 750 blimps worth of gas a day, that has to violently alter the physics inside the pipe.
Drastically. It is all about maintaining operating pressure. Natural gas doesn't just lazily float down the pipe. It is pushed by massive turbine-driven compressor stations spaced out along the route. If a gigawatt data center taps into the line and begins a massive draw, it creates a localized vacuum. The pressure in the main line plummets.
And if the pressure plummets, the gas stops moving.
Exactly. And the customers downstream of the data center, the paper mills, the local distribution hubs, suddenly watch their gas pressure die. So the pipeline operators have to calculate, do we have enough available compressor horsepower upstream to push an extra 150 million cubic feet of gas hard enough to overcome that massive draw while keeping the downstream pressure perfectly stable?
It sounds like an incredibly intricate, almost fragile puzzle. You can't just guess. You need the exact location of the proposed data center tap, down to the specific milepost on the Callahan line, to even begin running the pressure models.
Which is precisely why Nassau County enacted the moratorium. They cannot just look at a map and say, sure, we have gas lines, bring on the gigawatt facilities. They have to rigorously research the reserve capacities, the compressor horsepower, and the contractual limitations of their backbone infrastructure before they can confidently zone for these types of behemoths.
Okay, so this brings us to the crux of the entire deep dive. We've established the terrifying water risks, the mechanics of sucking the pressure out of the Floridan aquifer and inviting irreversible saltwater intrusion. We've mapped out the gargantuan energy needs, the sheer scale of the natural gas, and the extreme complexity of pipeline reserve capacity. The question becomes, how does a local government actually translate all of this physics, engineering, and hydrology into local law?
They write a highly specific, heavily researched zoning ordinance. This is the culmination of all the environmental and infrastructural research we've discussed. An ordinance is the mechanism that turns theoretical scientific concerns into binding, actionable legal requirements for anyone who wants to break ground.
I find the mechanics of these ordinances fascinating. It's like looking at the architectural blueprints for how a community defends its resources. The draft-style zoning framework being researched in Nassau County is broken down into several critical categories. Let's walk through them, starting with the most urgent, water and aquifer protection rules.
Because the Floridan aquifer is the most critical and vulnerable resource, The ordinance must build a fortress around it. Based on the moratorium drafts, the primary regulatory tool would be a hard, uncompromising annual cap on groundwater withdrawals.
So literally capping the well. The sources suggest setting a firm limit, something like 100,000 gallons per year for non-potable use. Given what we just talked about, facilities that want tens of millions of gallons a day, a 100,000-gallon annual cap, sounds basically like telling them no.
It is an intentionally restrictive baseline, designed to ensure that if you build here, you are not relying on the pristine aquifer for your industrial cooling. And the ordinance would likely go further by imposing stricter daily pumping caps during periods of declared drought. But the real engineering mandate comes in the form of the water recycling mandate.
Right. If they can't constantly pull fresh water, they have to use what they have over and over again.
Exactly. The county would legally mandate highly efficient on-site cooling water recirculation. They might set a minimum recycle ratio of 90% or higher.
Let's break that down mechanically.
Yeah.
What does 90% recycling actually look like inside a cooling tower?
Well, in a traditional, cheap, single-pass system, you pull cold water from the ground, run it past the hot server racks to absorb the heat, and then just dump the resulting hot water down the sewer. It is terribly wasteful.
Just use it once and dump it.
Yeah. A 90% recycling mandate forces the facility to build closed-loop systems. The hot water from the servers is pumped into massive cooling towers where fans blow ambient air across it. A small percentage of the water evaporates to release the heat, and a tiny bit called blowdown has to be flushed to remove mineral buildup. But 90% of the water is captured, chilled, and sent right back into the servers.
But if I'm a county inspector, how do I actually know they're recycling 90%? I can't just take their word for it.
You don't. The ordinance would require the installation of digital real-time flow meters on every intake and outfall pipe with direct, unalterable telemetry reporting straight to the St. Johns River Water Management District and the county planners. They may even require this data to feed into public-facing digital dashboards so any citizen can see the daily withdrawal rates.
Transparency engineered into the plumbing. That's smart. But what about the saltwater intrusion? How does the ordinance protect the underground aqueduct from reversing flow?
This is where the draft ordinance gets highly aggressive. It requires the tech company to drill and maintain a network of aquifer impact monitoring wells around the perimeter of their site.
So separate wells just for sensors.
Yes. Deep sensor wells that constantly monitor two things: the physical hydraulic pressure of the water table and the salinity, the salt content of the water. These sensors are tied to automatic shutdown triggers. If the telemetry shows that the aquifer pressure is dropping too fast, or if the sensors detect a spike in salinity indicating that the ocean is creeping inland and crossing a predetermined safety threshold, the system triggers a mandatory automated shutdown of the main withdrawal pumps.
Wow, that is brilliant, because it takes the human debate completely out of the equation. If the sensor detects salt, the pump turns off. There's no negotiating with the county commission. The physics shut down the pipe.
It acts as an absolute non-negotiable safeguard for the municipal drinking supply.
Okay, let's look at the energy and grid impact section of the ordinance. We mapped out the natural gas puzzle, but there is also the massive electrical load if they connect to the local grid.
The primary rule here is mandatory, rigorous consultation. Long before a building permit is issued, the applicant must sit down with regional utilities, like FPL, and submit load flow studies proving that the local transmission and distribution grid has adequate capacity to handle their demand. The county's hard line is that a data center cannot induce brownouts in local neighborhoods or starve existing industrial parks of power.
And to offset that massive draw, the draft ordinance pushes them towards self-sufficiency. You can't just be a parasite on the grid. You have to generate your own clean power.
The ordinance would likely mandate a minimum percentage of on-site renewables. For instance, requiring that 30% or more of the facility's power comes from dedicated on-site solar arrays or directly funded local renewable projects with a scheduled ramp-up to higher percentages over the next decade.
There was also a clause in the research about peak demand management. What does that look like in practice during a grid crisis?
It is essentially a legally binding curtailment plan. Imagine a massive summer heat wave in Florida. Every residential air conditioner in Nassau County is running at absolute maximum capacity. The local electrical grid is groaning, verging on collapse. The ordinance requires the data center to participate in demand response.
Meaning they have to back off.
Exactly. When the utility signals a grid emergency, the data center must instantly mechanically lower their power consumption, perhaps throttling down non-essential computing tasks or switching to backup generators to prevent rolling blackouts across the county.
To ensure they aren't wasting the power they do use, the ordinance uses a very specific metric called PUE. It mandates a strict energy efficiency standard requiring a power usage effectiveness cap of 1.25 or less. Let's make this tangible. What exactly is PUE? What does a 1.25 mean?
Power usage effectiveness is the global standard metric for data center efficiency. Mathematically, you calculate it by taking the total amount of energy entering the entire facility and dividing it by the energy used to actually run the core IT equipment, the servers themselves.
I'm trying to think of a mechanical analogy for this. Think of PUE like a car's fuel efficiency, but measured in reverse. If you put 2 gallons of high-octane gas into your car, but only 1 gallon is actually used to turn the wheels and move you forward, while the other gallon is entirely wasted just keeping the engine block cool and running the dashboard lights. That is a PUE of 2.0.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it. A PUE of 2.0 is functionally terrible. It means for every single watt of power performing useful computation, another full watt is wasted on overhead cooling fans, inefficient power routing, lighting. A mathematically perfect PUE of 1.0 would mean every single drop of electricity goes straight to the servers with zero waste.
So by writing a hard cap of 1.25 into the local law, what is the county forcing the tech company to do?
They are forcing the company to build a hypercar. They are legally mandating state-of-the-art engineering. To hit a 1.25, the facility cannot use standard chillers. They must employ advanced liquid immersion cooling, highly optimized airflow management, and cutting-edge power distribution. It ensures the county's energy isn't being squandered on outdated facility designs.
Let's transition from the invisible guts of the operation, the power and water, to its physical reality in the neighborhood. Let's look at the land use, environmental, and infrastructure standards, because these places are massive physical fortresses.
And this is where the zoning ordinance dictates how the facility interacts with its physical neighbors. The bedrock of this section is the requirement for conditional use permits. A tech company cannot just buy a huge tract of cheap agricultural land, bulldoze the trees, and start pouring concrete. They must be located in designated heavy industrial zones, and even then they must adhere to severe performance standards.
Like the setbacks. The draft ordinance proposes massive minimum distances from residential property lines, schools, wetlands, and surface water bodies. They demand dense, vegetated buffers, so you don't just see a massive concrete box from the road. But the parts that fascinated me the most were the regulations on sensory pollution, specifically light and noise.
Sensory pollution is often the most immediate, visceral impact on a community. These facilities are massive, 247 operations. Without regulation, they look like brightly lit prisons at night. Unshielded, intense industrial lighting can disrupt local wildlife migrations, disorient nocturnal species, and completely destroy the dark night sky for local residents. Therefore, the ordinance demands dark sky compliant lighting, meaning all exterior fixtures must be fully shielded, pointing downward, using low-intensity warm spectrums, and operating on strict security curfews.
But the noise. This is a thing I completely failed to appreciate. If you don't work in IT, you don't realize how deafening a massive server farm can be. And it's not the computer chips making the noise, it's the wind. It's the thousands of massive industrial cooling fans spinning at high speeds, constantly exhausting heat.
It generates a pervasive, low-frequency hum that can travel for miles if unobstructed, which is why the draft ordinance establishes an uncompromising acoustic threshold. A common regulatory limit being researched is 55 dBA, measured directly at the facility's property line.
Let's contextualize 55 decibels. If you are sitting in your living room right now just listening to this deep dive, the ambient noise of your house is probably around 40 to 50 decibels. A normal conversation is about 60 decibels. So 55 dBA is roughly the hum of a household refrigerator.
Yes, so imagine the engineering challenge the ordinance creates. If I am a resident standing on the boundary of my property, looking across the street at a 1 gigawatt industrial facility processing a significant chunk of the global internet, I should hear nothing louder than a kitchen appliance.
How do you even engineer that? How do you silence a gigawatt of heat extraction?
It requires an enormous capital investment in acoustic mitigation. The tech company cannot just leave their cooling towers exposed to the open air. They have to enclose them behind massive acoustic baffles. They have to install tuned mass dampers to absorb the physical vibrations of the turbines. They have to use sterilized, low RPM fan blades designed to cut through the air quietly. The ordinance forces them to swallow the cost of being a quiet neighbor.
And the ordinance also forces them to swallow the hidden cost of public services. We don't think about the local infrastructure strain. The data center has to provide wastewater treatment capacity proofs, proving they won't overwhelm the local municipal sewers with their cooling tower blowdown. They must implement extreme stormwater best practices to handle the runoff from 50 acres of impermeable concrete roof.
And crucially, they must pay for their own emergency footprint. A gigawatt facility with massive high-voltage electrical routing, massive diesel backup generators, and potentially volatile chemical coolants presents a highly unique fire and hazmat risk. The local volunteer or municipal fire department is not equipped for it. The ordinance mandates impact fees to fund specialized fire station staffing, advanced thermal fighting equipment, and dictates rigorous standards for on-site firewater storage tanks.
Even the act of building it is heavily policed. The draft calls for construction traffic management plans that go far beyond standard roadway easements. It restricts the routes that heavy 18-wheelers can take so they don't tear up residential roads. It enforces dust controls and noise limits during the multi-year build phase. It essentially acknowledges that constructing the cloud is a highly disruptive, heavy industrial event.
Which logically leads us to the final and undoubtedly the most vital section of the entire zoning framework: resilience, security, and accountability. Because drafting a perfect set of rules is a futile exercise if the county possesses no mechanism to enforce them when things inevitably go wrong.
Right. A law without a penalty is just a suggestion. So let's look at resilience first. We are talking about Nassau County. This is coastal Florida. We get hurricanes, we get storm surges.
Exactly. Therefore, the ordinance makes FEMA floodplain compliance non-negotiable. Furthermore, they require a formal, localized sea level rise vulnerability assessment. The tech company must model how rising waters will affect their specific parcel over the next 30 years, and they must build in physical adaptation measures, like elevating the server floors and backup generators above the projected floodlines. They are also required to maintain redundant backup systems for power, water, and cooling with fully documented resilience plans. If a Category 4 hurricane makes landfall, the county needs absolute certainty that this gigawatt facility won't flood, leak diesel into the wetlands, or become a massive environmental hazard.
But the part of the ordinance that really shows its teeth is how it holds a trillion-dollar tech giant financially accountable to a local county commission. How do you make sure they actually build the acoustic baffles and the closed-loop water systems they promised in the permit?
You leverage the one language universally understood in corporate development: financial assurances. The ordinance proposes the use of massive performance bonds.
Escrow accounts, basically.
Precisely. Before a single shovel of dirt is turned, the tech company must post multi-million-dollar performance bonds or place massive funds directly into a county-controlled escrow account. If the company suddenly abandons the half-built project due to shifting market forces, or if they accidentally cause environmental damage to a delineated contamination area that requires complex mitigation, or if they simply refuse to build the acoustic buffers they promised, the county does not have to sue them and spend a decade in court. The county already holds the company's money. They just seize the bond and fix the problem themselves.
And if they violate the daily operating rules, what is the ultimate weapon in the county's arsenal?
The revocation triggers. This is where the legal framework becomes a tangible threat to the data center's existence. The ordinance explicitly defines clear, objective conditions for the immediate suspension or the complete revocation of the facility's operating permits.
So if the public dashboard telemetry shows you are pumping 110,000 gallons instead of your 100,000-gallon cap, or if the county sends an inspector to the property line with a decibel meter and your cooling fans are blasting at 70 dBA instead of the required 55.
The county issues a notice of violation. If it is not immediately cured, your permit is legally suspended. The facility must physically power down the servers until the breach is resolved. For a facility processing global data, the financial hemorrhage of a forced county-mandated shutdown is catastrophic. It forces compliance through sheer economic terror.
You know, as I step back and look at this entire draft framework, the automated salinity shutdown sensors, the hypercar PUE limits, the multi-million-dollar performance bonds, the strict decibel limits. I keep coming back to a specific analogy. This zoning ordinance reads exactly like a highly aggressive prenuptial agreement between the local community and the global tech industry.
That is a remarkably accurate way to frame it.
Right. It's as if the county commission is sitting across the table from a tech CEO and saying, look, we love the idea of the capital investment. We love the massive boost to our tax base. But we have watched this marriage fail in other towns. We know exactly how it goes wrong. So before we say I do, and before you pour an acre of concrete, we are going to document every single worst case scenario. We are placing telemetry sensors in our ancient aquifers. We are measuring the sound of the wind at your property line, and we are locking your money in our vault just in case you break your promises. It is an incredibly proactive defense of a community's core physical assets.
And it is a defensive posture born of absolute necessity. You have to consider the scale of the power dynamic here. This relationship is vastly inherently asymmetrical. You have local municipal planners and county commissioners attempting to negotiate with and regulate corporate entities that possess more wealth and political leverage than many sovereign nations. If a county does not write an ironclad, scientifically rigorous prenuptial agreement directly into their municipal zoning code, the local environment, the drinking water, and the infrastructure will inevitably be consumed.
Okay, let's zoom all the way out. We have journeyed from the conceptual illusion of the cloud down 2,000 feet into the cavernous porosity of the Floridan aquifer. We've watched freshwater push back the Atlantic Ocean at the Crescent Beach submarine spring. We've charted the massive compressor physics of 150 million cubic feet of natural gas, and we've analyzed the legal architecture required to control it all. If we are synthesizing all of this, why should you, the listener, whether you live in Florida or London or Tokyo, care about a draft zoning ordinance in Nassau County?
You should care, because what is happening in Nassau County is a real-time, high-stakes case study of the hidden physical costs of our digital existence. Every single time you or I demand faster data transfer, more complex generative AI outputs, and seamless, unbuffered 4K streaming, we are initiating a physical reaction somewhere in the real world. A turbine spins, a valve opens, a pump pulls water from ancient limestone. Local governments are standing directly on the front lines of this digital explosion. They're the ones tasked with the impossible job of balancing the insatiable, infinite global demand for data against the finite realities of their literal drinking water and their geological stability.
It is the brutal physical manifestation of a digital world. And looking at the trajectory of all this research, it leads to a truly fascinating, somewhat provocative thought to leave you with. While Nassau County is doing this incredible, diligent research to mitigate the local impacts, protecting their specific submarine springs, analyzing their specific interstate gas lines, it raises a much larger global question about the fundamental architecture of the Internet's future.
It does, because if you extrapolate the current growth curves, as these data centers evolve from requiring 100 megawatts to demanding entire gigawatts of continuous power and millions upon millions of gallons of cooling water, the inherent tension between these facilities and local municipal infrastructure is only going to escalate. They are simply becoming too massive to integrate into standard human communities.
Which makes me wonder, will the next generation of local zoning laws become so universally strict and the sheer physical resource demands of the AI revolution become so astronomically high that these digital behemoths are eventually pushed entirely out of populated areas?
It is a highly plausible and perhaps inevitable architectural shift. We may very well witness the rise of isolated data islands. Imagine massive, multi-gigawatt server farms located exclusively in remote, unpopulated deserts or the freezing, dark expanses of the far north. Facilities completely severed from standard municipal power and water grids, surviving entirely on their own closed-loop microinfrastructure, perhaps powered by their own dedicated fields of small modular nuclear reactors, or sprawling horizon-to-horizon solar arrays utilizing advanced dry cooling technologies.
Because at a certain point, the cloud just becomes too heavy to live next door to. It really brings us full circle to where we started. We began by saying that thinking the cloud is weightless is like thinking your electricity magically originates from a plastic wall outlet. Now we've traced the pipes, we've walked the fault lines, and we have seen exactly how heavy that cloud truly is. It is heavy enough to require 2,000-foot industrial well shafts, thousands of miles of high-pressure steel gas pipelines, and a legally binding, acoustically buffered prenuptial agreement just to prevent it from accidentally sucking the pressure out of an ancient underground ocean.
It represents a profound, necessary shift in how we must understand and manage our personal and collective digital footprint moving forward.
It absolutely does. Thank you for taking this deep dive into the source material with us today, and for bringing your time and your curiosity to the table. Until the next deep dive, keep looking beneath the surface.